He represents the 19th district in Texas. Congressman, good evening. Thanks very much for being with us.
You bet. Greetings from the food, fuel, and fiber capital of the world in West Texas. God bless, and thanks for having me on the call.
We're glad to have you on the program. Let me begin with the president today signing the $484 billion stimulus plan, and now there is talk from Democrats of CARES 2.0 that could total $1 to $2 trillion more. From your standpoint, will that happen?
I know that what we passed and what the president signed to help small businesses get back on their feet in terms of this bridge loan that we're calling the Paycheck Protection Program was absolutely necessary, and necessary to compensate these folks for their losses, but also as a lifeline to survive and to keep their employees on the payroll so they don't end up on the unemployment rolls. That's going to be critical in our recovery efforts long term. In terms of the next phase of this, we've got monies that haven't even been distributed yet on the healthcare side, on the state and local fund side, and obviously we've recapitalized the small business bridge loan. So I think we just have to see how this plays out, what's working, where it's being absorbed, where the needs are, and make those adjustments and fill those gaps as we move forward. But I'm not in any rush to put another funding package. I think we've got to make sure that the spending is appropriate, it's adequate, but that we don't have any more unnecessary spending, because we've tripled our $1 trillion deficit, and we've added to a $23 trillion debt. And if we survive this pandemic crisis, which we will, and if we can come back in short order and stave off a long-term recession crisis or a depression-like economy, and I believe we will, then that's all great and good, but there's always the looming sovereign debt crisis because of us being over-leveraged. And someone's going to have to pay that, Steve, and generally it's a deferred tax on the next generation of Americans, so that's something we've got to look at as well.
Could you, and these are the numbers, as you said, approaching $25 trillion. Could you see a tax hike to pay for the stimulus plan?
No, I think what we've got, look, when we were prior to COVID, we had the best economy we've had in recent history. And your listeners know the numbers on unemployment. It seems like a distant past now because we have millions of Americans now on unemployment and the economy is turned upside down. I think what we've got to do is we've got to put forcing mechanisms in place in the upcoming packages that we pass, phase 3, 4, whatever's being contemplated, that forces both sides of the aisle, all members of Congress, both chambers, House and Senate, to deal with the issue of the debt and deficit. We always seem to punt on that issue because we need to put provisions in place that, again, are forcing mechanisms so that we can come up with some compromise solution. It won't be all Republican, it won't be all Democrat, but if we don't come together and find a way to start walking that debt and deficit back, then we are pushing off the next crisis to the next generation, and you cannot print money and borrow money to bail out of that crisis.
Congressman, speaking of money, you support the president's decision to withhold funding for the World Health Organization, but a number of organizations that traditionally line up with Republicans, including the Chamber of Commerce, saying in a pandemic that is a big mistake.
Yeah, I'm sympathetic to that, but I'm more sympathetic to Americans who have borne the responsibility, the lion's share of cost in an organization that has not served not only the American people, but the world community well by going along in a complicit manner with China, not releasing numbers, not allowing access to the data, and not being transparent. It's hurt the entire world in trying to respond to this pandemic. It's no telling what the cost would have been, or had we not had China try to cover this up, and the Director General of the WHO work in coordination with China, we could have stayed off a lot of costs, not just money, but human life. And I think that's serious business. And I think until they take serious action to investigate, I think the Director General ought to resign or they should fire him. And I think we should have a system where we're all paying into this WHO, just like the NATO and UN, based on population. And in the case of WHO, I think it ought to be based on risk as well, and the risk that every country presents because they are not either doing a good job or they are doing a good job. That ought to be factored in to the membership of an organization like this. That's not how it's run today. And if America's not going to hold people accountable and get their attention, it will never change, and we will just perpetuate status quo, which is unacceptable.
You represent the 19th District in Texas. What are you seeing among your constituents? How is COVID-19 taking shape in your area?
Well, I think like other communities and regions across the country, it's just it's really rocked our families and our communities in that our kids have come home from school where there's often a joint effort to continue their education online and with one or both parents. People are scared of the unknown, and we don't have a treatment, and we don't have a prevention in the form of a vaccine, and there's just those unknowns make people fearful. I think at this point, Steve, we are, I think, like a lot of communities, anxious to get back to some sense of normalcy. I think we are well aware that 80% of folks that contract COVID do not have many or much in the way of symptoms or any symptoms sometimes. And that presents a problem if you don't know it and they carry it into some in the mix of vulnerable people. But it is also something that I think people in their psyche can manage. And every community is different. And I think we can all use good judgment. I think the local leaders and state leaders can let the conditions dictate the height and aggression of the precaution necessary. And I think that's what you're going to see in the coming weeks. Our folks are no exception. They're ready to get back to work, into the marketplace, in some sense of normalcy as we phase in this recovery effort.
And for you personally and your family, I know from our producer, Nathan Hurst, it is Friday night, so that's game night for your family. What's on the agenda?
Well, they're watching a movie right now, and I will join them shortly. But, you know, my family's been great. I'm sure other members of Congress feel the same, but this has been 24/7 mode, and it's the right mode to be in because our country's hurting, our constituents are hurting, and we have no alternative less than to protect our country, but to also rebound and respond in a way that doesn't cost us greater, like they say, where the cure was greater than the disease. And that is a nuanced thing. That is not so straightforward all the time. And so I enjoy what I do. This is, speaking of game time, it doesn't get any better than this when it comes to serving your country and your communities. And so we're all hands on deck, and we're going to get through this, and we're going to look back and say, you know, it was unprecedented in terms of the crisis, but we had an unprecedented response. We came together as a country, and we did the things that were necessary, and we made it through that tough time just like we have in times past.
Well, enjoy the movie tonight with your family and Congressman Jodey Arrington. He's joining us from the 19th Congressional District, Republican from Texas. Congressman, we appreciate your time.
Steve, thanks for letting me join you. God bless to your listeners, and we will be back. We will be back.
Congressman, thanks so much.